It was a hot afternoon when Danielle Harris drove through a quiet street on her way home. She had just come from a long meeting at the state office. She was wearing a dark blue suit, her ID badge hidden in her bag, and a calm expression on her face. The road was almost empty, just a few cars. As she passed a stop sign, she noticed flashing lights behind her. A police car. She sighed and slowly pulled over. She wasn't speeding. She didn't run the stop sign. Her seatbelt was on. Still, she stayed calm. She placed both hands on the steering wheel, as taught in every safety course. The officer took his time getting out of the vehicle. When he finally approached, he tapped the glass hard. "License and registration," the white officer said sharply, not even saying hello. His name tag read Sergeant Brenson. Danielle rolled down the window. "Yes, officer." "Can I ask why I'm being pulled over?" Brenson narrowed his eyes. "Don't ask questions. Just do what I said." She raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. Slowly, she reached for her purse and pulled out her driver's license. She also handed over her car documents. He snatched them and stepped back. Danielle kept looking straight ahead, calm but thoughtful. Something felt off. This wasn't a routine stop. The officer looked angry for no reason. Brenson came back after a minute. "Step out of the vehicle." Danielle looked at him. "Is there a reason for that, officer?" "I said get out. Or do you want me to drag you out?" His voice was louder now, and his hand hovered over his taser. She could feel the tension rising. But she didn't shout. She didn't argue. She slowly unbuckled her seatbelt and stepped out of the car. As she stood up, Brenson tried to push her toward the trunk. "Hands on the vehicle, officer," she said calmly. "Please check my badge before you make a mistake you can't fix," he scoffed. "Badge? What are you, a rent-a-cop? I don't care who you work for. You're gonna learn today what real authority looks like." Danielle sighed. She knew this moment would come one day. Racism didn't care about your education, your title, or how respectful you were. Some people only saw one thing, the color of your skin. She reached into her blazer pocket and pulled out a sleek leather case. It flipped open, revealing her full identification. Danielle Harris, Chief Investigator, State Internal Affairs Division. Brenson's face changed instantly. You're with Internal Affairs?" "I'm head of Internal Affairs," she said quietly. "And I'll be reporting this incident." He stepped back, eyes wide, suddenly unsure. "Look, maybe we can talk about this." She interrupted. "No, Sergeant. You will remain professional while I drive away. You will not follow me. And in 48 hours, expect to hear from my office." He froze. She returned to her car, shut the door, and slowly drove off, leaving the officer behind, stunned. As she drove, her calm face slowly shifted. Her hands tightened on the wheel. She wasn't surprised, but she was tired. Tired of proving herself. Tired of being judged before speaking. But she also felt something else, determined. This wasn't the first complaint about Brenson. She had seen his name before. Minor complaints, dismissed reports. Her office had already been gathering data. But now it was personal. Now she had seen it with her own eyes. Danielle knew what needed to be done. She wasn't just a victim. She was someone with power, and she intended to use it. Not for revenge, but for justice. That night, she sat at her desk with the lights low and files open. She replayed the stop in her mind. Every word, every action. She documented everything with exact details, and then she opened a file already labeled Sergeant Mark Brenson, Preliminary Watch. With one quiet click, she moved it from observation to active investigation. This was only the beginning. Danielle didn't waste time. The morning after the traffic stop, she woke up early. The sun was still rising. Most people were still asleep. But her mind was sharp. Calm but focused. She had a mission now. She brewed a cup of coffee, sat at her kitchen table, and opened her laptop. On the screen was the Internal Affairs portal, a private database where complaints, records, and officer behavior were kept for review. She typed in Sergeant Mark Brenson and hit search. The file appeared. It was not empty. She scrolled down. 3 complaints from black drivers in the last 6 months. One claimed he used aggressive language. Another said he threatened to arrest a woman for talking too much. A third had no details, just marked case closed. No follow-up. No investigation. Danielle leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms. How many were ignored? She whispered to herself. Then she noticed something even more troubling. Each complaint had been marked, reviewed by supervisor, cleared. All three were signed off by the same name, Lieutenant Gary Doyle. She frowned. That name was familiar. Lieutenant Doyle had been on the radar of internal affairs for a while. Not for direct abuse, but for protecting officers who crossed the line. Danielle had heard quiet rumors before, but now she had a connection. Brenson and Doyle. She saved the files. She printed copies and locked them in a secure folder. It was time to move. At the precinct that afternoon, Brenson walked in, trying to act normal. But he was clearly nervous. He wore his uniform, his gun holstered, his badge shining. But inside he was sweating. Officers greeted each other. Brenson nodded at a few but avoided eye contact. He didn't know how much Danielle had told anyone yet. He hoped, maybe, it was just a scare, but his hope was short-lived. At 3 p.m., the precinct doors opened, and in walked Danielle Harris. This time not as a civilian, but as Chief Investigator Harris. She wore a sharp black blazer with her official IA badge clearly visible. She was not alone. 2 agents followed her, carrying files and equipment. Silence filled the room. Some officers whispered. Others just stared. She didn't need to shout. Her presence spoke louder than words. Lieutenant Doyle stepped out of his office. He forced a smile. "Miss Harris, we weren't expecting you today." "Then you haven't been paying attention," she replied calmly. "I'm here to conduct a preliminary integrity review." He blinked. "A what?" "An integrity review. Spot checks, interviews, file access. Standard procedure." She didn't mention Brenson, not yet. She wanted to see what Doyle would say without warning. Danielle and her team set up in the small conference room. Officers were called in one by one. Casual questions at first. How complaints were handled, how discipline worked, what the protocol was. She studied every answer. She could tell who was honest, who was nervous, and who was hiding something. When Brenson's name came up during one officer's interview, the room changed. Has Sergeant Brenson ever been accused of misconduct? Danielle asked. The officer hesitated. I don't really know the details, but some people say he's tough or aggressive. He didn't answer. Later, Danielle called Brenson in for a private interview. He walked into the room stiffly, sat down, tried to smile, but his eyes kept avoiding hers. "I assume you know why you're here," she began. "No, ma'am. I mean, maybe. About the stop the other day?" "Among other things." He stayed quiet. She opened the file and pushed a printed complaint toward him. "Do you recognize this?" He glanced. "I don't remember that person. You pulled over a young black woman. Her complaint says you threatened to arrest her for asking questions." "I don't recall it going like that." Danielle didn't argue. She pulled out a second file. "And this one? A middle-aged black man said you asked if he could even afford the car he was driving." Brenson looked down. I didn't mean it like that," he muttered. "You didn't mean it how, Sergeant?" He didn't answer. She leaned forward slightly. "The badge gives you power, but not the right to judge people by their skin." Brenson's hands tightened. "It's not about race." Danielle raised an eyebrow. "Then what is it about?" Silence. She stood up and opened the door. "This conversation isn't over. But for now, return to your duties." He walked out, trying to look strong, but his steps were heavy. That evening, Danielle met with her team. "Open a full review into all of Sergeant Brenson's stops from the past 12 months, she said. "Dashcam footage, body cam, audio, dispatch logs, everything. I want the pattern, not just the moment." "And Doyle?" one investigator asked. "Start gathering data on complaint closures. Look for connections. Who protects who?" They nodded. Danielle closed her laptop. Eyes sharp. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every person who had been silenced, ignored, or punished for simply standing their ground. And she would not let it happen again. Danielle knew the real battle wasn't in that one traffic stop. The real fight was behind closed doors, in quiet hallways, hidden files, and in the silence of officers who looked the other way. As she drove to the police department the next morning, She thought about how many people had likely suffered like her. Maybe worse, people without power, without proof, people who didn't have an internal affairs badge to flash when things went wrong. This wasn't just about Brenson anymore. It was about a system, a quiet, rotten system. She arrived at the precinct around 9 a.m. This time, she wasn't alone. She brought along Agent Layla Thompson, a trusted investigator from her unit, and Michael Rains, a legal advisor from the state attorney's office. They walked in with calm steps, but everyone could feel the pressure in the air. "You have the authorization," Danielle added. "It was approved last night." The woman quickly checked her system, then nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "Right this way." Inside the evidence room, Danielle and her team worked quietly. They reviewed 12 months of Brenson's stops. They looked at timestamps, locations, and recorded statements. Something strange appeared. Over 80% of Brenson's stops involved black or Hispanic drivers. In many reports, no clear reason was listed for the stop. The words "suspicious activity" were used again and again, vague and unchecked. Danielle looked up from the file. Too many shadows. Not enough light. Then Layla found something shocking. "Ma'am," she whispered. "This footage. It was never submitted into official review." Danielle came over and looked at the screen. It was dashcam video from 3 months ago. Brenson had pulled over a young black teenager riding a bicycle. The boy was scared, stammering. Brenson yelled at him, accused him of stealing the bike. The boy begged him to call his mother, but what stood out the most, Brenson never called it in. He told the boy, "I'm letting you off easy," then drove away without writing a single report. This video had never been added to the system. Danielle's jaw clenched. "He's hiding stops. Cherry-picking who gets written up?" Layla nodded. "And there's more like this." "I found 3 similar cases already." Danielle felt a mix of sadness and anger. Every missed report was a buried voice. Every deleted file was a truth denied. Later that day, Danielle walked through the precinct's break room, where a few officers sat having coffee. The room went quiet when she entered. She could feel the tension. Some were nervous, some irritated, others silently thankful. One young officer, Officer Malik Jordan, a black rookie, stood up as she passed. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "may I speak with you for a moment?" She paused. Of course. They stepped outside into a quiet hallway. Malik looked around to make sure no one was listening. I've seen Brenson do this kind of thing before," he said, his voice low. "Pulling over people just because they look off. I tried to say something once. What happened?" she asked gently. "Lieutenant Doyle told me to let it go. He said Brenson was just being careful and that I shouldn't stir the pot." Danielle looked at him closely. "Why are you telling me this now?" He took a breath. "Because I became a cop to protect people, not scare them. I didn't sign up to stay silent." She gave him a small nod. "Thank you, Officer Jordan. Your honesty matters." Before walking away, she added, "You did the right thing." Back in her temporary office, Danielle took a moment to breathe. She was gathering a storm, but she needed to be careful. Brenson was bad, but Doyle was smarter. He knew how to cover tracks, so she made a decision. She picked up the phone and called her contact at the Governor's Oversight Committee. "I need support for a deep audit," she said. "I believe there's long-standing misconduct protected by higher ranks." The response came fast. Approved. She now had the power to check not just Brenson but Doyle, the supervisors, even the former chief if needed. That evening, as she left the building, she saw Brenson outside, smoking in the parking lot. Their eyes met. He didn't look angry this time. He looked afraid. Danielle walked past him without a word. But in her mind she thought, "You judged me that day because of my skin. But now you know who I am." She got in her car, started the engine, and drove away. The case had grown bigger than she ever expected, and she was ready for every step of it. Danielle didn't sleep much that night. Her thoughts kept going back to the hidden dashcam video, the frightened teen, the missing reports, Officer Jordan's quiet courage. Every piece of the puzzle made the picture clearer. This wasn't just one bad cop, it was a network of silence. By morning, she had a new plan. She met her team at the state office before sunrise. The air was tense. Papers were spread out on the table. Photos, documents, maps. The whiteboard had names written in red marker, Brenson Doyle, and now a few others. Officers who had signed off on suspicious stops or cleared complaints without interviews. Danielle took a marker and drew a circle around one new name, Captain Henry Price. He was the supervisor over Doyle. His name appeared on multiple final approvals for complaint dismissals. If we're serious, Danielle said, we need to go above Doyle. Captain Price might be the one pulling the strings. Agent Layla nodded. He's smart. He's clean on paper. But he signs everything off. Like he's washing the dirt off for everyone else. Danielle leaned forward. Then we find the dirt he missed. At the precinct, Brenson was on edge. He walked past his co-workers with short nods. Whispers followed him. Some officers looked uncomfortable. Others avoided him completely. He could feel the pressure building. When he walked into Doyle's office, the door was quickly shut behind him. What did you do? Doyle snapped. Internal Affairs just requested a full audit of all complaint closures for the past year. Brenson swallowed hard. I didn't know she was IA, sir. I thought she was just a civilian? Doyle cut in. A black woman in a nice car. You let your ego mess with the wrong person. Brenson lowered his head. What do we do? Doyle looked angry but also worried. We do nothing for now. You keep your mouth shut. You don't talk to anyone. Let me handle it. But deep down, even Doyle knew this was different. This time, the woman they tried to intimidate had power, and she wasn't afraid to use it. Danielle and her team began digging through old files, cases closed too quickly, bodycam footage that never reached the system, citizens who stopped filing complaints because no one listened. They found dozens of questionable cases, and many of them shared the same pattern. Officers used vague language like uncooperative or looked suspicious. Most of the people stopped were minorities. Reports were always approved by the same chain of command: Brenson, Doyle, and Price. Then something unexpected happened. A woman walked into the Internal Affairs building and asked to speak with Danielle. Her name was Mrs. Etta Malone, a 62-year-old retired schoolteacher. She held a worn-out folder in her hands. I saw the news, she said. Someone told me you were looking into that officer. Brenson, I filed a complaint a year ago. No one ever called me back. Danielle invited her into a private office. Mrs. Malone sat down and opened the folder. Inside were pictures of her damaged car, a medical report about a bruised wrist, and a copy of a complaint form she had submitted. I was driving home from my granddaughter's recital, she said. That man stopped me. Accused me of being drunk. I wasn't. I don't even drink. He pulled me out of the car, slammed my wrist on the trunk. I kept asking why. He never answered. Danielle's hands tightened around the paper. And this was never investigated? Mrs. Malone shook her head. They told me I must have imagined it. Danielle stood up. Not anymore. That afternoon, Danielle called a press meeting, not a big one. Just a quiet briefing with a few trusted reporters. She didn't name Brenson directly, but she spoke of a growing pattern of misuse of authority in a local police unit. She promised the community, we are listening now, and we will not turn away. The news spread online. People began sharing their own experiences. Some had names. Some had dates. Others just said, I know what she means. Danielle watched the comments roll in. Stories that had been ignored were now rising. The silence was finally breaking. Back at the precinct, Captain Price read the headlines on his phone. He slammed the screen down on his desk. This is getting out of control, he muttered. He called Doyle and Brenson into his office. This woman, Harris, she's not stopping. She's calling reporters. Digging through our files. If she finds one more thing, it's over for all of us. Doyle tried to stay calm. We just need to stall her. Give her incomplete records. Delay her requests. Slow her down. But Brenson, now pale and sweating, looked at them both. It's too late. She already has the footage, the stops, the names. I think she knows everything. Captain Price narrowed his eyes. Then she needs to be distracted. There was a long pause in the room. No one said the word, but they all felt it. Danielle was in danger, not just professionally, but possibly physically. But they underestimated her because Danielle didn't just carry a badge, she carried truth. And she wasn't alone anymore. Danielle stepped out of the state office building late in the evening. The sky was turning dark and the street was quiet. Her laptop bag was heavy on her shoulder, but her mind was heavier. Every new file, every old complaint, and every scared witness added more weight to her mission. As she reached her car, she noticed something odd. The back tire was slashed. She stared for a moment, her face calm, but her heartbeat quickened. This wasn't random. Someone had sent a message. She turned and slowly walked back into the building. Inside, her team was still reviewing files. She quietly called Agent Layla to her office and explained what happened. "Do you think it's one of them?" Layla asked. Danielle nodded. "Yes, maybe not Brenson himself, but someone who doesn't want the truth coming out." Layla frowned. "We need to be careful." Danielle looked out the window. "No, they need to be careful, because we're not backing down. Because we're not backing down." The next morning, Danielle arrived with 2 security officers. She also asked for 24/7 camera surveillance to be added around the building and parking area. If anyone tried to scare her again, they'd be caught on video. Then, something unexpected happened. A young man walked into the lobby. Nervous, hands shaking, he asked to speak with Internal Affairs. Danielle met him personally. His name was Derek Lee, a former patrol officer who had resigned a few months earlier. "I left because I couldn't take it anymore," he said, sitting across from her in the interview room. "I saw things, heard things. Brenson, Doyle, even Captain Price, they all protected each other." Danielle leaned forward. "Can you give me something solid?" Derek pulled out a small USB drive. "Before I quit, I downloaded backup files from our internal drive. I wasn't supposed to, but I couldn't just let it all disappear." Danielle plugged in the drive. Her eyes widened. The files included audio recordings, internal emails, and even deleted dashcam footage. Some emails showed Captain Price ordering reports to be edited. Others showed Doyle blocking investigations by marking reports as accidental uploads. One recording made Danielle go completely silent. It was Brenson talking to another officer after a stop. His voice was loud and laughing. "I pulled this guy over for looking like trouble. Black guy, old car." "You know the type?" the other officer asked. "Did he do anything?" Brenson replied, "Doesn't matter. If they look wrong, they are wrong. That's the rule." Danielle slowly removed the headphones. Her face was calm, but her fingers gripped the table tightly. This was proof. At the same time, inside the precinct, Captain Price was feeling the heat. He had received an official notice that his unit was under state-level audit. Investigators would be arriving soon, people he couldn't control. He gathered Brenson and Doyle in his office. "This is falling apart," Price said, voice low but full of panic. "We're all exposed." Brenson looked tired, his face pale. "I think she has recordings," Doyle asked. "What kind?" Brenson didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence said enough. Price slammed a fist on his desk. "We have to shut this down." But while they panicked, Danielle acted. She called a press conference, this time public, standing behind a podium, surrounded by her team. She addressed the cameras. "For too long," she began, "some officers have used their badge as a shield, not to protect others, but to protect themselves." She didn't name names yet, but she promised accountability, justice, and complete transparency. "We have evidence," she said firmly. "We have truth. And no one is above the law, not even those who wear the uniform." The media exploded. Headlines spread fast. Internal Affairs, head reveals corruption within police unit. Whistleblowers come forward after IA chief breaks silence. Danielle Harris, a new face of justice. In every comment section, people shared their own stories. For the first time, voices that had been ignored were now being heard. Back in her office, Danielle received a call from someone she didn't expect. "Officer Jordan?" The rookie, his voice was shaky. "Ma'am, they're talking about you in the locker room." "Who?" she asked. "Doyle, Price, a few others. They're angry. Real angry, they said. If you don't back off, they'll make something up. Maybe try to turn it on you." Danielle thanked him and hung up. She wasn't surprised, but she also wasn't scared, because she now had more than her badge. She had evidence, witnesses, public support, and the law on her side. Late that night, she sat alone in her office. She opened Derek Lee's files again. She listened to one last audio clip. Doyle's voice, cold and clear, telling an officer, "You didn't see anything." "Understand," Danielle whispered to herself, "but now everyone will see everything." She locked the evidence in a secure drive, shut her laptop, and stood by the window. Somewhere out there, they were still trying to silence her. But she wasn't the same woman they stopped on the road. She was Danielle Harris, Chief of Internal Affairs, and the storm she was bringing had only just begun. The next morning, the state building was busier than ever. Phones rang non-stop. Emails flooded in. Reporters waited outside, hoping for new statements. Whistleblowers called to share stories, some from years ago, others as recent as last week. Danielle sat in her office, sifting through testimonies. Some were heartbreaking. A single mother threatened with jail for a broken taillight. A delivery driver accused of theft without proof. An elderly man pulled from his car and left bleeding on the road. And every story had one thing in common. They involved the same officers. Brenson Doyle, Price Danielle, wrote each name on the whiteboard with a thick red marker. Under them, she added the names of their victims. The list grew longer by the hour, but she wasn't done gathering evidence. Today was the day she had something bigger planned. At 2 p.m., she and her team entered the precinct unannounced. Her badge gave her full authority. This time, she brought 2 state auditors and 1 forensic tech specialist. The officers at the front desk stood, confused and nervous. Danielle simply said, "We're here for a digital trace recovery." The specialist got to work. He plugged into the internal system and began pulling deleted reports, emails, and login histories. Meanwhile, Danielle requested access to the locker rooms and personal desks of all 3 officers under investigation. Lieutenant Doyle came storming out of his office. "What the hell is this?" he barked. Danielle didn't even blink. "It's called accountability, Lieutenant. You can't go through private lockers without a court order." "Yes, I can," she replied, handing him a signed document from the Attorney General's office. "And I am." Doyle's face turned red, but he couldn't stop her. Danielle and Layla opened Doyle's locker. What they found inside was chilling. A second, hidden body cam. It wasn't registered. Danielle looked at the label. It had a name and a date written on it. J. Tran, 7/22/24. She turned to Layla. "That's the name of the missing person case." "The delivery driver," Layla whispered. "His footage was never found." Until now, Danielle placed the camera in an evidence bag. Her hands shook, not from fear but from fury. They were hiding evidence. Back in her office, she played the footage. It showed Brenson and another officer cornering Tran outside a gas station. They yelled at him, pushed him, accused him of stealing. He cried and begged them to check the receipt in his pocket. Brenson threw it away. Then they shut off the official camera, but this hidden one kept recording. Danielle sat still, jaw tight. Her team watched in silence. This could end their careers, Layla said softly. Danielle looked at her. It could also start prison sentences. Later that evening, Danielle made the boldest move yet. She filed formal charges of misconduct, evidence tampering, and racial profiling against Sergeant Brenson and Lieutenant Doyle. She sent the case to the state prosecutor and called for their immediate suspension. But before the suspension, orders could reach the precinct. Brenson disappeared. He didn't show up. For his next shift, his phone was off. His home was empty. His car was found parked behind an old factory with no note and no sign of him. Danielle wasn't surprised. Men like Brenson didn't take exposure well. They had built their power on fear. And once that fear was gone, they crumbled. Still, she didn't stop the investigation. She handed his file to the state police and kept going. Doyle, however, stayed. Angry, loud, he denied everything. Said the camera was planted. Said the complaints were fake. He even tried to sue Danielle for defamation. It didn't work. Her files were too strong. Her evidence too real. Public support too wide. Even Captain Price stopped defending him, and then came the final blow. The forensic tech returned with a hidden gem, a private email from Captain Price to Lieutenant Doyle. Dated 6 months ago, it read, "If Harris ever shows up, shut it down fast. She's not one of us. She's the type that digs too deep. We don't need another hero." Danielle read it twice, then she smiled for the first time in days. "Too late," she whispered. "The hero is already here." That night, Danielle drove home with her windows down. The wind was soft. The city lights passed slowly. She thought of all the voices that had once been silenced: Mrs. Malone, Derek Lee, Officer Jordan, and the dozens of names on her board. They weren't silenced anymore. She wasn't just investigating a few bad officers. She was cleaning a system, and she wasn't done yet because the biggest name on her board, the final one, was still waiting to be brought down. Captain Henry Price, and Danielle was coming for him next. For weeks, Danielle had worked quietly but powerfully, like a wave building strength before crashing down. Brenson had vanished, Doyle had been suspended, but now all eyes turned to the man at the top, Captain Henry Price. Danielle knew he was the most careful. He never raised his voice, never left fingerprints. He smiled at community events, shook hands with city leaders, and played the good cop in every situation. But she also knew something else. He signed off on everything, every complaint dismissed, every misconduct buried, every officer protected. He wasn't innocent. He was the architect, and Danielle was ready to bring him down. At the state office, Danielle held a meeting with her entire team. The whiteboard behind her showed a flowchart: Brenson, Doyle, Price. Beneath each name were boxes filled with emails, video files, complaint numbers, and testimony statements. Video files, complaint numbers, and testimony statements. "We've gathered enough to request a full ethics hearing against Captain Price," she told the room. "But we need one final piece, a direct order or confession." Agent Layla leaned forward. "What if we get him to say something?" Danielle nodded slowly. "Exactly. A recorded interview, one-on-one, no lawyers, no shields, just me and him." The room went silent. Everyone knew the risk. But Danielle was already standing up, already preparing. This wasn't fear anymore. This was justice knocking at the final door. 2 days later, Captain Price received a formal request to attend a voluntary discussion with Internal Affairs. He accepted calmly, wearing his usual polite mask. When he entered the IA building, he smiled at the receptionist, complimented the lobby art, and said, "Always a pleasure to visit." He was smooth, but Danielle was sharper. In the interview room, the walls were plain. A glass of water sat on the table. A recorder blinked quietly in the corner. Danielle sat across from him. "Captain Price," she began, "thank you for coming in." "Of course," he said warmly. "I've always supported transparency." She tilted her head. "Even when officers under your command were hiding footage and threatening citizens." He chuckled. "Let's not jump to drama." She didn't smile. "I want to understand," she said. "Why were so many complaints closed without investigation?" "Simple," he said. "Lack of evidence." But there was evidence. Body cam, witnesses. Sometimes even injuries. He raised his hand slightly. "If there were, I never saw them." Danielle stared at him, then calmly placed a printed email in front of him. It was the message he sent to Doyle 6 months ago. "Harris digs too deep. Shut it down fast." His smile faded. "That's fake," he said. "We traced the IP," she replied. "It came from your precinct computer. Your login. Your password." He leaned back. "This is a trap." "No," she said. "It's truth. You tried to stop us. But you failed." Captain Price's voice lowered. "You have no idea how the real world works, do you? You think you're a hero, but you're just making enemies." Danielle leaned forward. "I'm not afraid of enemies," she whispered. "I'm afraid of silence." And with that, she stood up and walked out. The camera in the corner had captured every word. The final piece had been recorded. That night, Danielle submitted the file to the Police Oversight Board and the Attorney General's office. Along with it, she included the full list of complaints signed off by Captain Price, his personal emails, and the hidden camera footage. She also wrote a letter. It wasn't long, just a single page. If we allow silence to protect the powerful, we destroy the purpose of the badge. I took this role not to punish, but to protect. And today, I am protecting every person who was told to just move on. Not anymore. Not under my watch. Danielle Harris, Chief Investigator. The next morning, news broke across every major channel. Captain Price under state investigation for cover-up scandal. IA hero Danielle Harris brings down police corruption ring. Justice finally comes for victims of abuse of power. The community cheered. People marched in support, and for the first time in years, families of victims felt seen. Danielle didn't go on television. She didn't give speeches. She just went back to her office and updated the whiteboard. 3 names were now crossed out in red. Brenson, Doyle, Price. But under them, in green, she wrote new names. Officer Jordan spoke up. Mrs. Malone fought back. Derek Lee, whistleblower. Jay Tran, still healing, because the story wasn't about her. It was about them, the ones who had been ignored for far too long. And now they had a voice. Danielle stood by the window that evening, watching the sunset pour golden light over the city. Her reflection stared back. Strong, tired, but peaceful. She didn't need revenge. She had restored balance. But just as she turned off her light and picked up her bag, a staff member rushed in. "Ma'am, there's one more thing. You might want to see this." Danielle looked at the paper. It was a letter handwritten from Sergeant Mark Brenson, and it said, "I was wrong. About you. About everything." Danielle stared at the letter in her hands. The handwriting was rough, uneven, like it had been written in a rush. But it was real. "I was wrong. About you. About everything. Mark Brenson, no threats. No excuses. No lies. Just a single line. And yet it carried more weight than most confessions ever could. Danielle sat at her desk, still and quiet. Her heart didn't race. Her hands didn't shake. But inside her, something long and heavy finally shifted. Maybe Brenson had left town. Maybe he was hiding. Or maybe, just maybe, he was changing. She didn't know. And for the first time, she didn't need to, because this story had never been about punishing one man. It was about rebuilding trust in something broken. Later that week, Danielle was invited to a community forum. She didn't want the spotlight, but she went because the people deserved answers. When she arrived, the hall was already full. Families, students, teachers, retired officers, victims, all sitting together. As she stepped onto the stage, the room grew quiet. She looked out at the crowd, then took a deep breath. "I was pulled over," she began, "not because I broke the law, but because of how I looked." A few people nodded silently. I didn't yell. I didn't fight. I showed respect. And yet I was treated like I didn't belong. That moment could have ended like so many others. It could have stayed quiet, forgotten, but I had a choice. Her voice stayed calm, steady. I chose to speak, and I chose to listen to others who were never heard. She paused. Justice isn't a title. It's a promise. The room filled with soft applause. Not loud, not wild, but genuine. That meant more to her than any award ever could. The next day, Danielle received another visitor, Officer Malik Jordan. He looked nervous, but happy. "I just wanted to say thank you," he said. "You showed us that being silent isn't the same as being safe." Danielle smiled. "You're the future of the badge, Officer Jordan. Make it worth wearing." He nodded, eyes shining with hope. Before leaving, he asked, "Do you think things will really change?" Danielle looked at the board behind her. The names, the evidence, the crossed-out lies, and the green names, the people who stood up. "They already are," she replied. The Police Oversight Board released its final report a week later. It confirmed multiple counts of misconduct and racial profiling under Brenson and Doyle, clear cover-ups, ordered by Captain Price, systemic, negligence in complaint investigations. The state filed charges against Price for obstruction of justice and misuse of authority. Brenson was declared a fugitive, but no longer a threat. Thanks to the work Danielle and her team had done, Doyle resigned before the formal hearings. But most important of all, the entire complaint review process was restructured across the state. A new rule required every complaint to be reviewed by a third-party board, not just the officer's friends or chain of command. And guess who was chosen to help lead the reform? Danielle Harris, not as just an investigator now, but as a public advocate. She continued working quietly, with focus. She trained young officers, held workshops, spoke to schools. Not for fame, but to prevent the next Brenson, the next Doyle, the next broken system. One day, she was invited to speak at a police academy graduation. She stood before a new class, fresh uniforms. Proud parents, new dreams. Danielle looked at them with steady eyes. "You will wear a badge," she said. "But never forget, it's not just a symbol of power. It's a responsibility." She paused. "And if you ever find yourself on the wrong path, remember what happens when someone like me gets behind the wheel." The crowd chuckled softly, and a few nodded with deep understanding. That night, Danielle sat alone in her office. The whiteboard was clean now. No names, no arrows, no red circles. Just a single sentence written across the top. "Justice begins when silence ends." She placed her badge gently on the desk beside her. A badge that once gave others power over her, but now gave her the power to protect. As she looked out the window, the city lights shimmered like quiet stars. The world was far from perfect, but it was better than it was before, because one woman had chosen not to back down, and because of that, many others had stood up. Because of that, many others had stood up.